In this lesson, we're going to dive deeper into the subject of code behind. Code behind is the most significant change conceptually from the classic ASP to ASP.NET Web Forms. What code behind does for you is that it gives a clear separation between the HTML content and any programmatic code that handles the events within the HTML. Back in classic active server pages, what you would have is a really ugly mixture of HTML and then VBScript or JScript that's mixed in. And sometimes that was pretty hard to read. But more importantly, if the page ever changed, like say for example, requirements came from the marketing department that they wanted to change the look and feel of a couple of pages, that could adversely affect whether or not the web page worked anymore. You might introduce new bugs, for example. Well, that's not the case with code behind in ASP.NET Web Forms. First of all, it's a very maintainable approach. You can have the code that handles events in one file, and you have any of the HTML elements in another file. This also allows for team development, so two people can be working on the file at the same time, and if there's any changes that are made to the interface, that can be done without disrupting any of the programmatic code that's behind the HTML. And the code behind approach is the default approach in Visual Studio.NET. In other words, you cannot create an ASP.NET web form very easily without using code behind. However, if you don't want to use code behind and go back to the old model where you intersperse the HTML with your VB or C# code, you can still do that. However, this is the approach that's more often taken by those who are using simply the .NET framework and a text editor like Notepad. So what we're looking at right now is the actual HTML that was created as we dragged and dropped items from the toolbox into the web form designer. It generated all of this HTML for us, or I should say HTML-like syntax. Microsoft has added a few extensions for its own purposes to enable the server controls, which we'll talk about a little bit later. But one of the things that you'll see at the very top of the page is the page directive that looks very classic ASP-like. You see that there's a language property which is equal to Visual Basic, and then a little bit later down you'll see the code behind equals and then a file name, and then inherits equals and then a class, Hello World Languages.webform1. Now what this does is it instructs the engine that compiles your ASP page with the code behind page where to look for the code behind file and the class in the code behind file that will support all of the events that are raised by the ASPX file. This might not make perfect sense right now, but as we go through it a little bit more, I'm sure it'll get clearer to you. So what we can do is take a look at the actual code behind file. And to do that, we could go back to the designer surface and we could double click, let's say on one of the items and see it, and it can pull it up for us. Or what we can do is select the Solution Explorer and select Show All Files, and we can drill down and select the hello world.aspx.vb and select View, and it comes up in this area. Let me move this back over. So this code should look somewhat familiar to you. For example, here's the button one click event where we added the select case and determined whether the user selected German, Spanish, or French, and here is the page load procedure where we added the items to the drop-down list box for the language. And one of the last things I want to show you in regards to code behind is that by default, when we created the Hello World Languages project in the last lesson, it by default created a web form called webform1.aspx. And therefore the code behind class, the public class webform1, stayed the same because we did not rename it. However, we can rename it as something that makes a little bit more sense for what we're doing here. So we'll call this Hello World Class, And when we do, we have to make sure that the hello world.aspx file is referring now to the correct class. Visual Studio.net takes care of this for us, actually. As long as we save our file and then we open back up the hello world.aspx and look at the HTML, we'll notice that almost as if by magic, the name of the class has changed to Hello World class. So this gives us a little bit of an insight into what Visual Studio is doing for us behind the scenes to facilitate code behind and make it very usable and very user-friendly. And so this concludes this lesson. This was a overview of code behind, and there are some other concepts that we'll talk about later on. But this helps you understand the basic relationship between the actual ASPX file and its code behind that handles all of its events. And we hope that this lesson was useful for you. Thank you.